In episode 6, the deal between UBA and Paul Marks marches on. The shareholders have been recommended by the board to vote yes on a sale, but the sale doesn't come without detractors. Many people think it's reckless and that a billionaire should not own a news division, which could be turned into a propaganda machine. It does, though, seem like a formality and that eventually Paul Marks will own UBA, so he heads to the office. He meets with the staff and he gives all of them a really nice speech about how they're very important and he's not planning on layoffs and he just wants to let them work. Just one of those speeches that it seems too good to be true. He then opens it up for questioning, and Alex really hammers him on the fact that he owns Hyperion and how will they be able to report on Hyperion with an unbiased view. She thinks there might be a conflict of interest, but the questioning catches everybody off guard because it's just so direct. Paul just says that he's not going to decide what is and isn't news. That's Stella's job. After this meeting, Corey wants to meet with Alex because the line of questioning was weird. After all, she is the one who brought him back to UBA to get the deal done, and now she's hammering him on issues and wondering who the hell this guy is and what his motives are. She does admit that she might have done this whole thing a little hastily, but they just need to do their due diligence on the matter. The thing is, she wants to be the one to do that due diligence. She wants to interview Paul Marks on her show. Corey, however, pushes back big time. He spent 2 years trying to sell off UBA, at least that's what he claims, and they're basically at the finish line. He doesn't want Alex Levy messing it up. He understands that she wants to be at the grown-up table, but as he puts it, it's not your turn. He yells at Alex that they vetted him, and Alex tells Corey, well, I haven't. And then it gets awkward because Paul Marks actually shows up, interrupting the meeting and tabling the current conversation for later. Paul, though, is kind of just walking around UBA and meeting with some of the higher-ups. Next person on his list after talking with Corey is his old colleague, Stella. They get a little bit into their background. When Stella worked for Paul, he told her that she wasn't cut out for tech, so she left and created her own startup. But Paul does take her off guard when he says, you're one of the reasons I'm interested in this place. That's something Stella wasn't exactly expecting to hear. She then goes into what UBA could do better, and Paul's all ears. She then asks, why are you buying UBA, though? And Paul says, this place has been treading water since Corey took over, don't you think? And Stella simply says, we've had our challenges. And Paul asks, why are you covering for Corey? But then they get interrupted because Paul has another meeting on the books. Paul's next meeting is with his top talent, Alex Levy, a one-on-one. And that's when she asks him if she can interview him on Alex Unfiltered. The thing is, Paul doesn't really do interviews. He ironically doesn't really like the media. But Alex pitches him the idea, pitches him as to why it would be a good idea, and he ends up surprisingly accepting. They set a date, and Paul's willingness to do it takes Alex completely off guard. Alex then heads upstairs to her office to break the news to both Isabella and Chip that she's interviewing Paul Marks in 2 days, and they're going to have to be the ones to prep. That's usually not enough time, but they don't have a choice in the matter. The first place that Chip heads is to Stella's office, because he knows that she passed cross with him back in Silicon Valley, so he figures to do background on Paul Marks, he would start there first. He asks Stella if she's ever heard any dirt regarding him, and she's pretty cagey with him. She claims that she barely knew him and she was still in school, but that's something that Chip doesn't really believe. He then tells her the reason why he's asking these questions, Alex and Paul's upcoming interview, and then he heads out to try to dig up some kind of dirt. A couple hours later, Chip returns along with Mia, and they're talking about the promotion of this interview, how they want to handle it. They go to Stella, but she's pacing in her office. Something is clearly bothering her. She's frazzled and not really paying attention. At one point, she snaps at both of them, but realizes that that was a mistake. And then she asks Chip if he found any dirt, and Chip hasn't yet. It's not for lack of trying. He has looked, just nothing's coming up. Chip and Mia then head out of Stella's office, but that thing that's eating at Stella, she has to tell Chip. So she pulls him off the elevator and says, we need to talk. She tells Chip that when she was a Stanford student working for Paul Marks, she ended up writing a code that Paul now uses and sells to governments throughout the world. Now, technically, the code that he does sell isn't Stella's code, but it might as well be Harvard Connect. He paid $50,000 for it and then forced Stella to sign an NDA because her original idea wasn't what Paul Marks turned it into. which was a sort of progressive policing tool. Guilt ended up building up inside of Stella until eventually she had a failed suicide attempt. Because of the NDA, Stella was pretty hesitant to tell Chip this, but she felt like word needed to get out. As Chip and Alex are preparing for their Thursday interview with Paul, Bradley has been entertaining some guests. Hal, his new fiancée Cheryl, and their new baby have come up to New York to pay Aunt Bradley a visit, and Bradley's really excited about this. So is Cheryl. Seems like it's her first time in New York. She can't wait to do sightseeing tours and whatnot. And Bradley is totally okay with being the tour guide. When they get to the Empire State Building, though, Hal tells Bradley the real reason he showed up. It's to turn himself in. He can't deal with the guilt of everything that happened on January 6th. He knows it's only a matter of time before the FBI finds him, so he'd rather do this now, when his daughter is young, than do it later. Bradley is stunned by this. She also thinks it's dumb. She did everything in her power to cover for Hal, and now he just wants to throw it all away. And selfishly, she knows that this could blow back on her if it comes out that she did cover for Hal. She flat out tells him, "You can't do this. We need to put this behind us and move on." She knows that just by telling Hal he has to move on doesn't mean he's going to do it. She needs to make him understand that by doing this, he's making a terrible decision. She does this by setting up an interview with a guy that turned himself in on January 6th and now regrets it. So when Bradley gives Hal and Cheryl a tour of the studios, she makes sure that Hal is front row center to hear this insurrectionist talk about his experience after he turned himself in and what it did to him and his family's relationship. Spoiler alert, it wasn't good. The timing of that interview, though, isn't lost on Corey, who pays Bradley a visit and asks, "Hey, is this just a mere coincidence?" And Bradley admits, no, it's not. Hal's thinking of turning himself in. But don't worry, I'm handling it. Corey then turns to Bradley and says, "Fix it, or I will." That night, Bradley is going to have a dinner date with Laura. Laura starts off by giving some gossip on Audra, and then she wants to know about the drama that's going on with UBA and Paul Marks. Laura, though, can tell that Bradley's mind is not present at the moment. It's somewhere else. And Bradley says, yeah, it's just Hal's here with his kid and his fiance. She doesn't want to tell Laura the truth. When she gets home, she approaches Hal about not doing this, but he says, I have to do this. This starts a pretty big fight between the two. Nothing getting accomplished. The next night, when Bradley does the news, she's still very distracted. She has trouble getting through stories. But as she's live on the news, Laura went to her apartment. Laura knew that Bradley wouldn't be there. She came to talk to Hal. She apologizes to Hal and admits that she encouraged Bradley to cut him out of her life. But she realizes that was a mistake, and she wants to be with Bradley. She's pretty sure Bradley wants that too. She asks Hal for support because she thinks it'll mean a lot to both Bradley and to her. And even though she was talking about the relationship, this was the moment that Hal realized he couldn't turn himself in. So while Bradley out, he writes a note saying he changed his mind and he's heading home. And home is where Paul Marks is, waiting to do the interview with Alex Levy. And at first it starts out like a normal interview. Why do you want to buy UBA? And then she drops the bombshell about the, quote, Stanford student. And Paul knows who she's talking about. But what he didn't know was the suicide attempt. He handles himself, though, pretty well, defends his actions, and then they wrap up the interview. And when they're wrapping up, Chip and Isabella head off, and they leave both Alex and Paul to talk about what happened. Paul isn't mad about how the interview went down. In fact, he actually respects Alex more. He's just curious as to how she found out about the Stanford student, and she says, I can't reveal my sources. They then hook up. A romance is blossoming, but as one romance is blossoming, another is ending. Because unfortunately, Isabella and Chip break up in the car ride home. But as that romance is ending, another is rekindling. The next day, Bradley rushes over to Laura's apartment, apologizes for dinner the previous night, and the two get back together. And as that relationship is rekindling, another relationship is mending, although this one isn't a romantic relationship. It's Paul and Stella. He doesn't apologize for what he did. He just says, you could have talked to me because I didn't know you felt like that. Stella feels like this is a good time to quit. She thinks it's for the best, but Paul says no. UBA needs somebody with a vision. I think that person is you. Look, the reality is Corey won't be here. He tells her that he's going to send her an offer for employment, and she will take Corey's job. And now Stella has a lot to think about. Thank you so much for checking out this recap. Please consider subscribing to the channel and subscribing to my Patreon. Hit thumbs up if you liked it. Smash that thumbs down button if you thought it sucked. If you left a comment, I don't get back to you. I usually don't check the comments unless they're like a super comment. Also, if you don't see the next video up on the end screen, not to worry, it'll be up in a day or two.